Hi, I'm Rigger. This is You Were Right, and episode 4 of Ice Queendom just dropped, and boy did I enjoy this one, so let's jump right in and talk about it. Although, first, I guess we should cover controversy. No, although I do wish RT would have, launched with subtitles so that people paying for the service could watch the... You know what? Moving on. That's not the anime's fault. We'll talk about the anime. This was a really good episode. I didn't know anything about the episode. I didn't know about the pre-screening stuff and people who got sneak peeks of this. So I'm just going in with what we've seen so far up to episode 3 and the predictions and ideas we talked about in other videos. It's hardly the greatest mystery to work out. There's lots of things suggested, but it was nice to see some of the things we were right about and some of the things we can discuss. It was really cool. And starting this inside the dream was a great way to go. So we'll start from the start. I like how immediately we establish that the world isn't right, that this isn't reality. The boundaries of the world seem to be guarded by Schnee symbols. The snowflakes are literally Schnee snowflakes. It's not reality. And while that seems obvious, it'll become very important later, because one thing I do like about this episode is we do have little bits of comedy, and we do have some cool things that just can't happen in RWBY, or couldn't happen in normal RWBY, but under these circumstances they can, as long as they remind their audience that this is a special circumstance, and it is. I will say, while watching it, I did actually think it could be perhaps used as a strong criticism of the show as well. That if you came here to see RWBY, this world isn't really RWBY, because they dodge a lot of the rules, they get around a lot of things, because the whole thing's in a dream, so it's just weird dream logic, it's whatever they want it to be. You're only sort of bound by whatever Weiss's mind cooks up. So that's possibly a criticism, but it also allows for cool things that we don't normally see, so let's just enjoy the ride is how I'm approaching it. And I do think that immediately it's really cool that we see that the world is constructed of things on Weiss's mind. The first thing we see is that road sign that makes no sense, and RWBY comments, oh, that's just like Weiss telling you to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. And following it up, the first thing we see is the train tracks and the White Fang attacking a train. Well, that just happened. Of course that's on her mind, all these things coming together. I think that's one of the things I'm really liking about this is the exploration of what dreams are and the things being on her mind being adapted into the story she's created for herself, this weird narrative. It's very interesting as a character exploration of Weiss herself, without it being focused on Weiss herself. It's a very interesting way to approach that. One thing that is a cool stylistic flair, but I feel like we're never going to get properly explained, is how these coins work. Obviously, they're like symbols in the dreams, but Shion says they only have a certain number of coins, and if they run out of coins, that Shion can't help them. And that's confusing, because if it's all Shion's semblance and it runs out, wouldn't it then end? And it seems like we might be sending in more people with more coins so they can make more. It's a weird whatever. That's fine, we'll just move on past it for now. They might cover it later, we'll see. But we do get a very video game-like approach, where RWBY has a number of different options she can expend her coins on to get different effects. And as predicted, immediately the phone comes up. Told you, they're not putting in that phone unless you're going to use it. We've already jumped outside the dream to see what's going on out there. That was always going to be the way. I couldn't understand people who thought the whole thing was just going to be in the dream and weren't going to go outside at all. We already did that. That phone is there for a reason. But we can do more than just the phone. You can summon these checkpoints or portals that can portal you in and out, which is really cool. You can summon a map, which was kind of useless, but it's interesting because it's a video game map. It only reveals the paths you've walked on, and I kind of like that. And I like RWBY having to take a photo of it with her scroll because it was disappearing. These are cool features, although the map one, less useful unless you've already explored a lot of the dream. Though RWBY herself even comments on this, that she wasted that coin. And immediately we also get a confirmation from the last video we made where all these things are reflections of how Weiss sees people, which seems kind of obvious. That, as predicted, the RWBY in the dream was there somewhere and has been replaced by actual RWBY, filling their shoes and wearing their clothes and using their different weapon. It's cool. And again, yeah, this is how Weiss sees RWBY. Reckless, trying to show off, silly weapon that's almost a toy, so here it's a snowboard. It's cool, and I do like inconsistencies, like Weiss doesn't know how the weapon works, so when RWBY tries to fire it, it turns out the barrel's on the wrong end. It makes sense. Weiss wasn't paying that much attention to the weapon, she doesn't exactly know how it works, it's just the transformy flashy weapon that RWBY has, that toy. And also, back to Shion's coins, Ice Queendom is getting in early with the possible merch to sell. I bet you there's going to be RWBY plushies pretty soon, or RWBY decoy plushies. Although again, video game style, it makes me think Genshin Impact and a lot of things have been doing stuff like that with the chibi sort of decoys. But, you know, whatever, it works. And we also get restating of the rules when we jump outside, with Glinda saying when Blake and Yang are doubting themselves and blaming themselves, that hey, you guys are really important. If we tried to enter the dream, no matter how powerful we are, we'd be seen as alien and outsiders, rejected and, destroyed. And that's why it's so important. Which leads us to my favourite thing about this episode, and probably every RWBY fan or longtime RWBY fan's favourite thing about the episode, the nod to the shadow people. What a great use of this, that all the random citizens kind of don't matter, all the crowd. So here, they're shadow people. Because, as Shion explains, that only people Weiss is close to or invented are in her mind. So, the robots and those kind of things, they all have appearances, they all appear as characters, the workers are all the same person, but the general crowd, they barely exist, so they're just shadows. But we get to see our lovely shadow people back again. It's an excellent touch, and I love it. And that's almost how a dream does fill out. It just fills out with sort of blurs on the edges that just give the impression of what's going on sometimes, you know. Not every person in the crowd has a recognizable face. So as far as paying homage, they're doing a brilliant touch with little things like that. And also we have more reinforcement that these isn't the real world, but it gives you an idea of how Weiss sees everything. Because the other weird thing in this episode, or one of the many, but one of the other more weird things is Bat Whitley, this little hovering creature that is annoying and is always, hanging around. And it's Whitley. He's just a weird little creature in this, but still dressed as brother, not treated like something different. It's just how the dream has spat out these ideas. Just like Winter is in the book, almost faceless, an authority figure that just, repeats lines and hands down harsh judgment. Well, that's who Winter is. She's harsh and cold, but teaches lessons and is an authority figure who Weiss actually looks up to. But perhaps the most devastating in the mindscape little nod here of how Weiss views her life is you have Jacques appearing overhead as this big, domineering face. You have Winter being distant in the book. You have little pest Whitley, but her mother is just a shadow. Almost just like we saw in the first episode. It's almost like she doesn't know what she looks like anymore. She clearly does, but in her projection, she's so distant, she's so far away, she's just consumed with alcohol, she's just laughing, she's just not there, and she's a shadow just like all the other faceless entities that fill out the world. That is devastating, and I love it. There's some really good stuff in this episode, and I was betting on it. I was really hoping we'd get to this point because it makes some of the shortcomings of the first three worth it because we had to get to this point. And yeah, I think they're knocking it out of the park with a lot of this, and I can't wait to see more. But another big criticism people had is removing the humor, and I thought that might be because we didn't do a lot of the same jokes as we did in the first version. And sure, we skipped those jokes, but we also know those jokes. Here, there are more jokes, and I think they're actually pretty funny because they're integrated into dream logic. They're wacky and don't really make sense. One of them being all the Kleins. We know, as RWBY fans, that Klein is the Seven Dwarves. And in this, they haven't really established that. He hasn't really done that much. But we're getting an exploration of that in the dream instead, where there are 7 Kleins, each with each of his personality types. And we've met 4 of them. There's Happy Klein, who runs the factories. There's Dopey Klein, the door. There is one of the Kleins that is the candle. I'm not sure which one that would be. And there's Grumpy, who seems to be running the military. Fair enough. And they've established that pretty much everywhere in the dream that we're going to be seeing that isn't just sort of faceless streets are places important to Weiss. So they're all locations, like there's a dust shop, and that's tied to business, and there's the factory, and there's of course her home. So we have all these key locations that we're going to be moving between, which is really cool. And Klein starts us on that journey. Speaking of Klein, that's one of the places, well actually just before with one of the sentry guards as well, you get this hail of Big Nicholas. They all say Big Nicholas. It's like a salute. And you have this great dynamic again in Weiss's mind where everyone sort of praises Nicholas. Everyone is in service to Nicholas, or they say so. But it's not really how things are going, because Jacques and his overbearing, dictator-like hold on the entire area, with constant propaganda running, that does sing the praises of Nicholas, but then repeats, but Jacques gave you all your jobs, you know. Nick got all the dust, Nick built the Schnee Empire, but Jacques runs the Empire and got all these people their jobs, so do your job. It's really interesting. It's that conflict again in Weiss's mind behind her father with this dominating control over everything, this hold on it, but this reverence for Nicholas, so everything still goes back to mentioning him, despite the fact we've never really seen him except for on a picture, and that wasn't even in this series. But that kind of works as this reverenced figure that everyone talks about, but you don't see him anywhere. Except perhaps maybe the big statue at the top might supposed to be him. We didn't really get a good look at it. Doesn't really matter. Point is, we have a really cool world set up that's all run by the logic in Weiss's mind. But then we have other things in the dream that are really cool for what they allow. Like, immediately, RWBY is using her semblance a lot more. And people have a lot of questions sometimes watching RWBY, like, why doesn't she use her semblance more? And then, well, drains aura. Well, here, does it? Is there even really aura in here? Just, everything operates like magic, so far. And maybe the limitation of aura will come up, but kind of like I predicted, things here are a lot more extreme and over the top in action and what they can do because it's a dream. We see that immediately, because RWBY starts busting out her semblance all over the place and is fine. And then, just as soon as they establish how cool that is, the world shuts it down. Unauthorized use of semblance not allowed. So, now we know that if she keeps doing that, she's gonna get detected. But, if she is detected, she can just start busting it out all over the place and do really cool action. That's everything we want it to be. And again, we see more of this basically magic approach when Weiss enters her control room, her boardroom, because magic gloves just take her coat from her, just do things. And that's fine, why not? But that's where I said you could criticize it. There could be people who say, we don't like that, we want to watch RWBY, and RWBY has these rules in place for a reason. Or you could say, this is a cool dream variation, we can, take off the brakes and just go crazy. And that really comes out in the final action scene. RWBY even says it. Was Weiss always that tough? No! Weiss is way tougher here than she was at the time. In the real world Volume 1, she was nowhere near that capable. But she, in the dream, is great. Because of course she is. It's basically running on fantasy. And speaking of that, when I was talking about declines, I didn't get over to the way that the world is seen. Because again, injecting humor, there's little things like in the language used. Because a very simple joke is used that's great. The most important rule in the kingdom is you can't act like dummies. Dummies is the worst thing you can be. Don't do behavior of dummies. And yeah, that's exactly how Weiss sees things. So RWBY is a big dummy. So when she's acting like a dummy, she gets reports that there's a dummy in town and goes to get the dummy. It's great. It's just silly language. But it's treated in such a serious way and presented in such a serious way as if it's a law, because yeah, it's a dream. Which leads us to more silliness and yet sort of horrifying when we get to the Dopey jail cell, which is where one of the Kleins is, and he is guarding the sillies. The sillies who are way too silly to be let out. They have to be kept behind bars and out of the way. And who is it? It's Team Juniper. Well, minus Pyrrha. We haven't seen her yet. But Jean, Ren, Nora. And they're all... Okay, I don't know if they're meant to be cats because in Japanese it's not usually mew. It's nya. But they all seem to be mewing like cats. So if someone knows if that's a different animal they're supposed to be in Japanese onomatopoeia, let me know. But either way, they're all just saying nonsense and acting like animals. Like cute little animals just pouring at the bars. That's how Weiss sees them. As to be discarded and silly and to be locked away. And yeah, that's not reality, but it's a great way of what Weiss's mind prioritizes, obviously. But again, notably, Pyrrha isn't there. And we've talked about that there's a good chance Pyrrha is with Weiss in one way or another, because that's what Weiss valued. Her perfect partner would be Pyrrha. That's all she wanted. And I do think in that trailer, when Pyrrha says something like, there's no better team for the job, I think she's talking about perhaps an Atlas team. Or perhaps talking about herself and Weiss as the team they're gonna go do something. I don't think she's on the other side at all. And if Weiss is pretty damn powerful in this world, I can't think how ultra powerful the one she looks up to like Winter and Pyrrha will be, who she puts on big pedestals. That could be really interesting. But then we come down to the end of the episode, where RWBY is down to 1 coin. She's run away, she used a decoy in a door to get away, got 1 coin left, and we know that if she uses that coin, Shion said that they can't help anymore. We don't know what that means. I thought it would kick them out of the dream, but apparently no. And then Weiss gets there, finds RWBY, and attacks, and we cut. Now, 2 things could happen. One is RWBY dies, and I really wanted that to be the case, that RWBY gets killed and then wakes up. But if that was going to happen, I think he would end the episode on RWBY being brutally killed and getting that visual, like a sword through the chest and blood, and cut to credits, and then next episode we come back and she wakes up. So it makes me think perhaps captured, which could go into things that RWBY has 1 coin left to get out but can't use any more tricks and gets captured, and then we have to send in Blake and Yang. That would narratively make sense. Because those were the 2 sentence options that Winter laid out. Killed or imprisoned for life. So I think we're going for imprisoned for life, as much as I wish it was killed. But the fast pace of this makes me pretty hopeful, because there's a chance that the team goes in and they still all die and have to get ejected and sent back in again. And we do have cool things about doubts. We had an exploration of not just Yang and Blake saying that they were blaming themselves for what's happening, but also RWBY feeling like Weiss hates her because everything's against her. And Shion saying, don't necessarily, interpret it that way, using metaphors about currents and streams. It's a really good exploration of how we interpret things, especially in a dream, because dreams are all about interpretation. How you might see something one way, but the message of the dream isn't necessarily that. Everything fighting RWBY might not be because she hates RWBY, it's her combating with her own ideals. And to that, in the show, there's no fairness in the city, but that girl in black keeps appearing. And Weiss says she can't get her mind off her at the moment. That girl in black, that intrusive girl in black, who Weiss can't stop thinking about and is bothering her. And that's obviously Blake. So, those intrusive thoughts, that idea that maybe all the fairness aren't bad. Those cool ideas that I want to see more explored. And hopefully, if we're already at episode 4, and we did so much in this episode, I actually think it'd be a good thing if we don't spend the whole rest of the show in the dream. If we get killed and have to try again, and stakes go up, and drama goes up, and we can explore more of these things. And I think that's everything. I really enjoyed this. Despite the setback with the whole subtitles thing, I really was pumped by the end of this. I want to see more. I'm really liking this. I'm fine with them abandoning some of the rules. I'm fine that Shion's semblance stuff doesn't make sense, because it allows for such a cool exploration. It's a really fun way to do things. And even after Ice Queendom is done, if they want to continue in a new continuity, I'm fine with that, to just see more alternates of cool things that could have happened. Because I really like some of the approaches they're taking. And even there was RWBY's declaration at the end, that she sees what Weiss thinks of her, of what she interprets it, and says, fine, I will snap you out of this, and then I'll never talk to you again. That's the decision she's come to, because that's what she's interpreting it. And so everyone has lots of ways to grow, lots of things to do, and there's so many things you can read into, like the domineering, robotic approach of Jacques. Is Jacques even in this world, or is he just a robot overlord face that tells them all what to do? Are we actually going to see a person there? I don't know. Because does Weiss really see him as a person, or more just a dominating figure? There's so much to read into, so many ways this could go, and I can't wait to see it. So that's going to do me for now. Thank you all so much for joining me for this little review. I hope you enjoyed Ice Queendom as much as I did, and this video. If you did, please leave us a like, please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let's share our opinions and ideas, because I want to hear them. And until next time, my name is Rigger. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.